Similarly, attitudes in schools towards gender participation in sport is quite significant. So usually there is a lot of clubs on offer for boys to get involved in sport, whereas for girls it's very limited. Because of this, then girls might not feel that it is an interest of them to get involved in sport and they don't need to. Um, but also obviously an issue that there's not enough on offer for them. I do believe that this is changing, but it's still something that compared the amount that's offered for boys compared to girls is still quite significant, but it is something that is changing. So gender is a constantly talked about issue within football. It is an issue that is gradually improving. However, the difference between male and female football is significant in multiple areas. To begin with, money in women's football compared to men's is vast. Some of the top male footballers in the world earn up to £700,000 a week, whereas women's footballers earn around £30,000 a year. One of the reasons for this is due to sponsorship. So sponsorship in male football brings in millions and millions of pounds a year. So for example, Chevrolet pay the Man United men's team £47 million a year just to be on the front of their kit. This is a huge difference compared to women's football. Sponsorship is just one example of the way football clubs in the men and women's game bring in money. But just as an example there, it proves the amount of money that men's clubs bring in compared to women's clubs. Because the women's teams bring in less money, it has multiple implications on women's clubs. So things like training facilities and equipment won't be as advanced compared to men's, meaning that it could be argued that women's footballers can't progress and reach the same level as men due to not having as adapted and top of the range equipment. Additionally, they won't be able to afford to pay high level training staff. That will play a big role in the player development and recovery. On the other hand though, because of the amount of money that men's football brings in, men's footballers are provided with top of the range facilities, along with equipment, staff, and on top of that being able to pay them a huge salary. In addition to this, differences in money income, media coverage of men and women's football is shocking. If you compare the media coverage women's football gets compared to men, it is significantly different. So as an example, in 2015, the FIFA Women's World Cup accumulated a total of 25.4 million viewers, whereas the 2018 FIFA Men's World Cup racked up a total of 3.57 billion viewers. Just from that stat alone, it is obvious that the media coverage of men's football compared to women's is vastly different. Additionally, if you look at the sports section in newspapers, like The Guardian, or sports websites like BBC Sport, the majority of the news and information will be on men's football, whereas women's football gets barely any notice in comparison. As a result of this, in the lack of media publicity for women's football, it has a significant negative impact on the number of females that get involved in football. This is partly to do with the media not making it seem important by the lack of coverage and notice that it receives. Therefore, this will pass on a message to girls and women that getting involved in football isn't a priority for them. Saying this though, gender equality in the media is something that is improving, which is backed up by the 2019 Women's World Cup, seeing more of some of the biggest crowds it's ever seen, with millions of people watching it on TV across the world. In my opinion, I still believe it will be a long time until it reaches the level of media attention that men's football gets, but it is definitely on the way up. Thirdly, difference in spectator attendance at football games for men and women is hugely different. As an example, Brighton Stadium has a capacity of over 30,000, which gets full at all men's games, whereas when the Brighton and Hove women's team get to use the Amex, which they don't always get to do, Brighton and Hove Albion usually only provide tickets for one stand, which doesn't always get full. This again makes women's football appear less important, which can result in lack of participation for women in football. I believe that media coverage is the main reason for why women's football gets little attention across the world. Obviously, the media is huge nowadays. Everything is published through that, and a lot of people can access the media in multiple different ways. If women's football got more media coverage, then people will, they will get more interest in it, and therefore things like sponsors will want to invest more money into women's football. More media coverage will also help to inspire girls and women to get involved in football more, because it will be seen as more important and cared about. Finally then, performance enhancing drugs used to be a huge issue within sport, but I think it's fair to say they have supposedly become less of an issue nowadays. PEDs are drugs that are taken by athletes as a way of enhancing their ability during performance. One example of PED taken by athletes are stimulants. There are many different types of stimulants, but the overall reason for taking them are that they increase alertness, short reaction time, decrease fatigue, and improve concentration. An example of a stimulant is modafinil. Stimulants would be suited to sports like archery, table tennis, and tennis. Secondly, peptide hormones are taken to stimulate growth and cell production. This helps to boost muscle mass and increase energy levels. HGH, which is human growth hormone, and is an example of a peptide hormone that you might commonly see taken by sprinters, rugby players, or boxers. Anabolic steroids are a third example of a PED that have a similar effect to peptide hormones by helping to build muscular mass and much easier. This will help improve power and strength of an athlete. Therefore, it will suit athletes like sprinters and rugby players. In addition to this, diuretics are a PED that have an effect of reducing the body weight of athletes, as well as drawing off water to mask other drugs in the body system. Boxers or MMA fighters could take diuretics in order to be able to fight in lower weight class. Finally, a drug called EPO helps to increase red blood cells in the body, which will benefit endurance athletes. Lance Armstrong, who's one of the biggest names in sports drug taking history, took EPO, which helped him to 7 Tour de France titles. Another technique for increasing red blood cell count is blood doping. The way that blood doping works is that prior to a competition, an athlete would remove a certain amount of blood from their body, and it will be frozen in a secure place. The body naturally replaces the missing red blood cells in the bone marrow, and then it is released into the bloodstream. Prior to exercising or competition, depending on when the athlete and their coach have agreed, the blood that had been frozen will be injected back into the bloodstream by way of venous injection. Consequently, that raises the red blood cell count in the athlete's blood vessels, allowing for a higher volume of oxygen to bond with hemoglobin. Therefore, when it comes to exercising, the body's cardiovascular system won't need to work as hard to get an increase in oxygen to the working muscles. All of the above have been stated by WADA as an illegal drug within sport, and any athlete that gets caught using them will be banned and can face serious consequences. So the World Anti-Doping Agency, otherwise known as WADA, was established in 1999 as an international independent agency composed and funded equally by the sport movement and governments of the world. Its key activities are research, education and development of anti-doping capacities. WADA have stated that their main vision is to create a world where all athletes can compete in a doping-free sporting environment. Part of their role is doing scientific research into drugs and producing a list of prohibited substances and methods. Overall, WADA is the main anti-doping agency in the world that plays a key role in reducing the amount of PEDs taken in sport. I believe that they're doing a really successful job because over the last 20 years they have been part of catching drug users and people associated around drugs. For example, Victor Conte was someone that was brought to justice by WADA after his extreme involvement with athletes and PEDs. Victor Conte was founder of Balco, that was a business which supplied anabolic steroids to professional athletes. British sprinter Dwayne Chambers was one of the many athletes that Conte supplied drugs to. Conte was busted in 2003 and was sentenced to 5 months in prison along with 4 months home confinement. This example shows how seriously the use of PEDs are taken in sport and some of the consequences that can be given to people that associate with performance enhancing drugs in sport, as Conte was. So overall then, athletes taking PEDs has a real negative influence on the sport and on the sport in general, themselves and also other people within the sport. The reason for this is because the people taking PEDs are simply cheating by taking substances which boost their performance, giving them a physical edge over everyone else. Cycling is arguably one of the most well-known sports for drug use, and this leaves a dark cloud over cycling as a whole, simply due to the amount of cyclists that have been caught taking drugs. Some cyclists won't take drugs and will generally train their bodies hard to be able to compete at a world-class level. However, the people that take drugs will not only be cheating those athletes of being able to do well, but they will also cause suspicion on them for possibly taking drugs due to the amount of cyclists that have been caught in the past. The way that PEDs have decreased in sport is from improved testing, which has been enforced by WADA and the IOC. The improved testing has made it a lot harder for athletes to get away with masking drugs they've taken. This testing has become better thanks to improved scientific technology developed in sports labs by top sports scientists. This technology is constantly having to adapt and change due to new drugs being made that are designed to not be detected during the testing that takes place. Therefore, overall, I believe that PEDs is something that is improving massively in sport. Simply that people aren't taking them as much anymore, which is what we think anyway, thanks to governing bodies like WADA and the IOC that are putting in a lot of work to ensure that PEDs aren't associated with sport.